Governor Otter and other state leaders made education the top priority during the 2018 legislative session. They approved a large funding increase, about $100 million, for the K-12 public schools budget. That includes money for teacher pay raises, classroom technology, and for efforts to help our youngest students become better readers. But not all education measures got through, including a proposal for private school vouchers using tax money. Today, we look at some of the big issues in education coming out of the legislature and moving forward, plus school safety, with Superintendent of Public Instruction Sherri Ybarra and Teachers Union President Carrie Overall, ahead on Viewpoint.
From Idaho's News Channel 7, this is Viewpoint.
Welcome to Viewpoint. I'm Doug Petcash. The big budget decisions on education sailed through the legislature this year with broad bipartisan support. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle agreed that education would be the top priority once again. Some other issues faced more debate or got shot down, at least during this session, and other initiatives are still in the works, including a big one on school safety that my first guest is spearheading. Joining me now to talk about what happened in the legislature and what lies ahead in public education is State Superintendent of Public Instruction Sherri Ybarra. Superintendent Ybarra, thank you for being here today.
It's my pleasure.
Well, this is my first opportunity to talk to you since the session ended, so I did want to touch on some of the developments that came out of there, including the $100 million increase in public school funding for K-12 education. What do you think is the most important aspect of that funding increase and where it was targeted?
We had several priorities that we were working on through our education plan. I think the biggest ask from the stakeholders on education groups across our state was the career ladder, funding for the teacher pay. I think that and the wireless access for all of our students and the reading initiative are some of the top priorities for this session that were funded and showed our priority for education in Idaho.
And I believe it was just over $40 million for teacher pay raises. The union still has a concern that teachers on the upper side of this pay scale, the more veteran teachers, are being ignored under this career ladder plan. How do you respond to that concern?
I think it's a valid concern, and we do have a master teacher premium that I think one of their concerns is, as a portfolio type approach, but it's just not enough. And I think the report that we commissioned on the educator shortage shows that we're not retaining our veteran teachers in the profession. So I think moving forward, one of the conversations I would like to keep in the forefront in the minds of everybody is that master teacher premium, not to be confused with mastery-based education for kids, but master teacher premium focuses on the veteran teachers in Idaho. And as a veteran teacher myself, I think that's something that, like I said earlier, is a valid concern. One of the original task force recommendations was a funding for our veteran teachers, and I think something that we need to revisit. There was a lot of work put into that by the task force.
And there's only one more year left of the career ladder plan, so do you think that next year that you'll request that funding for all veteran teachers rather than just the few that would, or I'm not sure the numbers of those that would qualify for the master premium? I
think it's too early to speculate, but I do think that a step in the right direction is to get that conversation back on the table rather than reinvent the wheel. That was not funded in the original task force recommendation, and there was a lot of work and effort put into that by a lot of folks at the table, and I think instead of reinventing the wheel, we need to start there and revisit that and have that conversation moving forward. I think that was a step in the right direction. I'm not saying that's the perfect answer, but I do believe that that's where we need to begin the conversation, and it'll be exciting for me to sit down with stakeholders and see what their priorities are for the budget this coming session as well. No sooner than we get one budget through, it's time to start talking about the next one, but that will be one of the priorities.
Well, you went on what you call the Education Roadshow recently, and then that's going to continue again in the near future here. What is the top one or two things that you're hearing from the educators that you're talking to?
Well, some of the things that we are talking about, the post-legislative roadshow, is to talk to folks in districts and schools about some of the new legislation or laws that may have changed that may impact boots on the ground folks. We're talking about our National Assessment on Educational Progress, or the NAEP results. Idaho is holding their own. That's one of the only apples to apples comparison of a test that we have across our nation that's highly valued and trusted. by educators and parents across the nation, and we are doing quite well. Matter of fact, in reading, we've made quite a few gains, and only 2 other states in the nation outperformed Idaho, so we have a lot to be proud of.
I thought that test showed that, though, that there weren't significant gains with the 4th and 8th graders when it came to reading and math.
They're showing some gains. What we're not showing significant gains in is our English language learners, and so that's not different from what the rest of the nation is seeing, and so we're having conversations about what are we going to do for our at-risk populations, such as our English language learners, but we are seeing some bright spots in our National Assessment on Educational Progress test.
And speaking of the reading part of it, the legislature also increased funding once again for that early reading, early literacy intervention for K through 3rd graders. Not as much as the governor had requested, but still a funding bump for that program. How important is that? And do you think it was enough that was put into that part of the budget?
It was one of the top priorities for the stakeholder group in the budget. So I think with our new Idaho reading indicator that was also funded this year, I think it's vitally important. As a prior 3rd grade teacher, I understand how important it is to close that gap before our kids get to the 3rd grade, because the research will show after 3rd grade, if they're still having a gap in their reading skills, that gap is likely to increase throughout their school career. And there's a lot of research tied to students who can't read and entering the criminal justice system. If they're not successful in school. Reading affects every aspect of a student's life, so it's very important that be our focus. I think it's also shows that with the progress on our National Assessment of Educational Progress test scores, that we are headed in the right direction with making reading one of our top priorities in Idaho.
The federal government also just recently approved Idaho's plan to close the achievement gap among students. All 50 states were required to do that under the Every Student Succeeds Act. What is the focus of Idaho's improvement plan to keep the kids improving in their learning?
There was a couple of really important focuses in there. One is our new accountability model that will actually be rolling out this spring, and also the other focus was what happens when there are schools that aren't making the gains for kids that we'd actually like to see in Idaho, and we have something called the STAT team in place for that now through our ESSA plan. And what that is just like in a hospital, when you hear the word STAT, that means attend to it quickly. That'll be the same thing throughout our ESSA plan, and for those schools who aren't making the gains. The State Department will offer research-based approaches and a menu of opportunities to go in and support those schools and students to achieve that aren't performing at the level that the state of Idaho would like to see.
All right, let's turn our attention to school safety. As the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida played out, as the head of Idaho's public schools, what was going through your mind as you saw, the tragedy there?
Actually, as the head of Idaho's public schools and as the mother of a public school student myself, the first thing that ran through my head is my heart went out to those families. I think that I had the opportunity to sit down with the Florida State Superintendent in March at our policy meeting in Washington, D.C., and I think this KISS initiative, Keep Idaho Students Safe, that we're bringing forward definitely is a step in the right direction. It's not to say that schools and districts aren't doing things to keep our kids safe already, but this showed me that as the mother of a public school student and as Idaho's top advocate for education, we can always do more.
We'll talk a little bit more about the KISS initiative in just a minute, but also then around that time, a month later after the shooting happened, you had these March for Our Lives events where thousands of students all over the country marched to raise awareness for gun control legislation, or as they put it, responsible gun legislation, or sensible, as well as just school safety measures. Did their message reach you, or did it need to? Were you already thinking along those lines?
We've already been thinking along those lines, but certainly it was something that made us sit up and pay even closer attention to this safety initiative. And one of the things that we are doing as I'm traveling across the state with the post-legislative tour, not only are we talking about legislation that may affect boots on the ground folks, the National Assessment of Educational Progress test scores. We're also talking about the safety initiative, and I'm getting the opportunity to sit down and talk to students as well about their thought moving forward with this initiative and what they think needs to be included in that. And I think the bright spot in all this is everybody agrees we need to do this, but we're actually moving very quickly and getting into the details of exactly what should that look like. I mean, everybody's on board with absolutely we need to do this, we need to do more to keep our students safe, but we're really working on the three-pronged approach of what does that look like.
And the three prongs are school safety courses, security grants for schools, and Idaho Crisis Communications Counselor. What do you think is the key part of that?
So there are actually all three prongs I think are vitally important, but I think after the opportunity to sit down with the superintendent of Florida schools and actually the commissioner for education in Tennessee as well, who both have been exposed to the unthinkable in their states, both of them said the crisis communications counselor at the state level is key. Should the unthinkable happen in Idaho, you'll have to do things you never thought you had to do. And the crisis communications counselor actually called in the troops when in one incident there was only 4 counselors for 1,500 students who were exposed to an incident like this. They were able to connect the dots quickly and send more counselors in for students and staff. The other thing that person can do in the meantime is help districts with their emergency management plan. It's the planning that they do year-round to keep their students safe. And if there are gaps or holes in that plan, the statewide crisis communications counselor can offer resources and support for things that they may need, a dot connector, so to speak, for schools and districts around the state. The other part of that I think is really vitally important of the KISS initiative is the security presence in all districts across the state of Idaho.
There's some grants that could actually allow for more resource officers in more rural districts that can't do that right now, right?
Absolutely, and it'll be offered in a grant form so that if districts do already have a security presence and they need something else, that's that local control or that flexibility for them to apply for something else.
Would that have to be state funded or federally funded?
It will, and it'll come through the safe and drug-free schools line item that we'll be asking for an increase there, and that's why we're asking for folks' feedback right now.
And how can they do that?
It'll be a heavy lift. For the state of Idaho, it's nearly a $20 million ask.
Okay.
And so they can offer their feedback right now through the State Department's website. There's a survey they can actually take and give us our feedback, and we're really going to need the support on this to show the importance moving forward of safety for our students.
And it's just gathering ideas right now for this, and as you mentioned, it's right on the homepage of the State Department of Education's website.
Yes, and like I said, I don't think there's a person that I've come in contact with that doesn't say we need to do this. I think we've already jumped right into the details of what does that need to look like, and I'm very pleased because we're actually having really great conversations about the three-pronged approach. What do we want to do in the safety courses for our educators, and what do we want to do with a security presence, and what do we want to do with a statewide communications counselor? I think we're getting most feedback on the security presence and on the training for our educators.
Well, as always, I wish we had more time to talk, but I think it was nice to be able to cover such a wide range of topics this morning. It's always good to see you, and thanks for coming in.
Thank you for the invite. It's my pleasure.
I appreciate it. Well, up next, the Idaho Education Association on the issues. My conversation with the Teachers Union president on the increase in education funding, teacher shortage in the state, private school vouchers, and whether or not to arm teachers to make our schools safer.
Paging passenger Lisa Murphy, final boarding call for your flight to Honolulu.
This is what can happen if you buy the wrong mattress.
Passenger Lisa Murphy, final call for your dream trip you've been saving up for the last 8 years.
So, buy the right mattress.
No worries, Lisa, we'll send you pictures.
Denver Mattress, the easiest way to get the right mattress.
What could you lose in a home fire? Your possessions? Your home? Your memories? Don't let your world go up in smoke. Make sure you have working smoke alarms and keep children 3 feet away from anything that gets hot, because fire is everyone's fight.
late again. Everything all right?
It's the same thing, different day.
Have you had a chance to check out that website yet?
Mental health challenges don't go away on their own. You are not alone. Other veterans have overcome similar obstacles. Find stories of hope and recovery today at maketheconnection.net.
Verify is a way we fact-check information.
We went through the ad claim by claim.
While dispatchers aren't trained in secret code,
To get to the truth, I talked with 3 experts.
we verified that with public health professionals.
The advertisement, like many political attack ads, does leave out some important context.
And welcome back to Viewpoint. I'm Doug Petcash. Earlier this week, I sat down with Carrie Overall, the president of the Idaho Education Association, the teachers union. I asked her about the big education developments that came out of the 2018 legislative session, as well as some of the concerns and priorities of the teachers union. Carrie, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Doug. It's good to be here.
All right, you're welcome. Well, first of all, the legislature this year approved about $100 million more for K-12 public education over last year's budget, including money for the career ladder teacher pay raises. How does the union feel about that level of funding increase this year?
We are pleased that the legislature saw fit to continue funding the 4th year of the career ladder. We know that teacher recruitment and retention is key to student success, and providing salary increases for educators excuse me, is an important part of that. We still remain concerned about the lack of money on the top rung of the career ladder. We know many veteran teachers across the state have not received a pay raise in many years because they're simply getting the state allocation. And so we look forward to what comes next. We know next year is the end of the career ladder, it's year 5. And so we are eager to see the plan for how we pay teacher salaries in the coming years.
Now, one of the concerns that you had raised was about those top tier teachers and their pay increase. Is there a frustration level growing there, or are you concerned that they're not seeing some of that benefit?
We continue to hear frustration from especially rural educators across the state who have not received a raise in many years. If their district has discretionary funds or local funds that they can use to supplement those, they do, but many of our smaller districts don't have that ability, and so we continue to hear from smaller districts they're losing experienced educators to the larger districts with more resources that can pay those teachers at the top of the rung.
One of the other issues too is the concern about the teacher shortage. A lot of money, extra money, or more money was put into education this year. Is that helping to address your concerns about the teacher shortage across the state?
Some. So the state board put out a report this last spring called the Teacher Pipeline Report, and it shows that Idaho has a 15% attrition rate, with 15% of educators leaving within their first 5 years. And while we know that salary is a part of that conversation, we know that includes a number of different factors: resources, opportunities for professional development, incentives to work in a district. And so while we agree that salary is part of that, but they are, we know that it's more than that, because they are putting money in for early career educator salaries. We need to do more to change that conversation to ensure that educators feel respected across the state.
Are you hoping that that happens in the 5th year of the career ladder plan?
What's that?
Increasing the pay for those top tier teachers.
We are. We know the master educator premium is scheduled to be rolled out, but again, that doesn't go to every educator. Educators are required to complete a series of modules and demonstrate proficiency, and there is some concern that that would be limited to a certain number of educators, and we have heard reassurance that that isn't the case, but we also know that when dollar figures are attached, there's always a concern that there may not be the money there. So we would like to see just money placed in the salary allocation so that districts can pay their educators in a way that makes sense in their local community.
In recent weeks, we've seen massive teacher walkouts in at least 3 or 4 states now, including Oklahoma, West Virginia, Kentucky, as they try to get higher pay. Is there any circumstance that you can see of something like that happening here, or is it a case of letting the career ladder play out and go from there?
Well, anything's possible. What we've seen in those states across the country is that oftentimes it is a grassroots movement of educators who have said enough is enough. We know that teachers are powerful, we know that they are well respected, and we know that they're in every community across this state. And while we're not calling for a walkout, we know that when we're 49th in per pupil funding, educators at some point may say enough is enough and Idaho can do better.
Another concern you had early on at the beginning of the legislative session was the proposal to provide vouchers for private school students using state public money. That got shot down.
Yes.
Do you feel that that is the end of the issue?
No, we know that that voucher bill will be back next session, and we remain concerned that while we're already 49th in per pupil funding, the pot of money is not large for our K-12 schools, and so we believe that we need to be investing in our public schools, not siphoning money away to private schools. And so we'll continue to engage legislators, work with stakeholders to ensure that the resources are there for public schools.
Now, another one of the changes that happened through the legislature was that the science standards were revised and revisited this year. How do you feel about the work that was done on that issue?
We are pleased the science standards were finally passed. We had a number of educators from across the state work on those the last few years. We know that they are the professionals. They're using these standards every day in their classroom. And we know that having good quality standards to educate our students with is key to student achievement. And so we are grateful that we can move forward and take that next step and continue to ensure that our students are prepared for the next level and beyond.
Was there anything else that you would have liked to have seen added in those standards, or do you like what the progress they made this year?
We were pleased. They passed them in full, and that was the recommendation from the educators that served on that committee. So we are looking forward to moving on.
And one of the controversial issues there was, of course, whether or how much to include climate change in. And so with those developments, then you're happy with where it all stands.
Yep. The educators we heard from had addressed many of the concerns that they heard from legislators, and they were comfortable with how the language was presented. And we trust their work. We know that they are the experts, and we are looking forward to allowing them to be rolled out in schools across the state.
And one of the other increases in the budget was for early reading intervention. How important is that in your mind?
It's key. We know that if students can't read by 3rd grade, then they will struggle through much of the rest of their education career. And the more money we can get into those intervention programs to ensure that students K through 3 are receiving help learning to read, the more likely they will be to be successful throughout their entire career.
And this, of course, is a sensitive subject, but in the wake of the school shooting in Parkland, Florida, I'm curious if your members feel that Idaho schools are safe.
I have not heard members directly tell me that they feel unsafe at school. Members continue to express concern about the call for educators to be armed. We know we do have a few districts that have guns in schools in some form or another, but for the most part, educators are there to teach students. They went to college so that they could educate, not so that they could carry guns. And so we continue to believe that it needs to be a partnership among the community, among law enforcement, and among all those involved to ensure that schools are safe, and should not be the sole responsibility of educators.
And as we head into the end of this school year and then into the summer break heading into next year, what do you think the one big issue will be at the beginning of next school year and the legislative session?
We know going forward there's the continued discussion around the Idaho Reading Indicator, which is the test that measures whether or not students are at proficiency levels in reading. That was kind of the end of the year going home issue, and while the legislature did approve the new IRI, there is still concern among lawmakers, and so we have said we are committed to being involved in that process, to meeting with our members, meeting with educators, seeing that work in action across the state to make sure that the new test approved is the right test for Idaho students going forward.
Carrie, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
You're welcome. Up next, a note on higher education and the cost of it. It will be more expensive to go to Idaho's public colleges and universities next fall. We'll tell you how much of a tuition increase the State Board of Education approved.
When you're part of Race for the Cure, you help people right here in our community. 75% of the money raised helps provide local health services to the uninsured and underinsured. The other 25% helps research the cure for breast cancer. You will make a difference by racing for the cure. Set up a team now and begin fundraising for donations that will save lives. To learn more about Race for the Cure, visit the community page at ktvb.com.
Going to extremes to make sure your teen is following the rules? It might be time to take a new approach. Call the Boys Town National Hotline at 800-448-3000. Our trained counselors are there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The Boys Town National Hotline. Take your parenting skills to new heights.
Time to celebrate trees at the Capitol on Arbor Day. It's April the 27th. It's to help honor the student winners of the 2018 Arbor Day Photo Contest. Then you can head on over to the Capitol Park for a planting of a cherry tree, and while they last, the Idaho Forest Products Commission will be giving away 3 blue spruce seedlings.
To post your local event, visit the Idaho Events calendar at ktvb.com.
They are stories of hope.
Absolutely did give me my life back.
Second chances.
A second chance to see my children grow.
Last year, KTVB and Yes Idaho began a campaign to register more organ donors in Idaho. Because of your compassion, Idaho is now 10% above the nation's average. KTVB and Yes Idaho celebrate Idahoans who have said yes to organ donation. Want to become an organ donor? Register now at yesidaho.org. The cost of going to college will get more expensive in Idaho. The Idaho State Board of Education has approved a tuition increase for full-time undergraduate students at Idaho's public colleges and universities starting this fall. The tuition increases vary for each institution, but range from 3.5% to 5% for in-state students. The board says the requests were based on the increased costs of running the schools, plus the increase in salaries, which the legislature recently approved. And 5 finalists have been named in the search for the next Boise State University president. Current President Bob Kustra announced last year that he would retire at the end of June after 15 years at the helm. The finalists are Dr. James Lentini of Oakland University, Dr. Kevin Reynolds of Portland State, Dr. Jack Thomas of Western Illinois University, Dr. Robin Wacker from the University of Northern Colorado, and Dr. Daniel Weeks from the University of Northern British Columbia. Over the next 2 weeks or so, each candidate will visit the campus of Boise State and attend forums hosted by Boise State students and faculty. If you'd like more information about the finalists, head over to the hot links section of ktvb.com. Well, that is all of our time for this week's Viewpoint. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Doug Petcash. I'll see you tomorrow on today's morning news and right back here next Sunday morning for another Viewpoint.